Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize. I had this on my BlackBerry for 4 o'clock or something, and it was Jean's fault because she didn't tell me.
And
So-
I passed you in the garage.
and
I
you
thought,
know-
oh man, I'm not late. I beat the president.
Well, I couldn't understand because they said Chuck was going to be late, and I'm like, well, gee, Chuck's early. Okay, sorry. All right, I'd like to call to order the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, November 13th, 2014. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll take one for the team for you anytime.
Okay.
Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Simon.
Here.
Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Germana.
Here.
And Ms. Conley.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. All right, is there any public comment related to the agenda?
Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, so we'll go to item 4. Madam Clerk, would you read the item, please?
This is not an official resolution, but a part of discussion, and it's for a contract with BZT Acquisition in the amount not to exceed $798,000 for lease of space located at 75 Erie View Plaza, Cleveland, for operation of the Family Justice Center for the period June 1, 2014 through May 31, 2019.
Good afternoon. I'm Jill Smilak, and I'm the manager of the Witness Victim Service Center. And I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity today to address the committee of the whole. You have before you for your consideration a lease with BZT. Oops, thank you. with BZT Acquisitions for space rental at 75 Erie View Plaza. Pending your approvals, 75 Erie View Plaza will become the home of the Family Justice Center, which is a joint initiative between Cuyahoga County and the City of Cleveland. And I want to ask Judge Ron Adrian to step up to the podium for a moment to just give a brief introductory remarks from the city's perspective.
Welcome, Judge Adrian. I know you have been talking about this for like, what, 15 years?
At least 10,
Okay.
maybe 15.
Well, you still had black hair.
Thank you. Good afternoon to the council, and thank you for the opportunity to address you as it relates to this matter. As Judge Conley has pointed out, this is a long time coming, and as I told someone a little bit earlier, we're now at the point where I can pretty much think that I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm fairly certain that it's not a train. We have been working on this initiative. It's a joint initiative between the city and the county and a number of independent agencies and nonprofit organizations within our community. And the idea really is to try to put together a place where individuals who are the victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, and stalking can in one place have their needs met. That's not necessarily to say that it's all going to take place there, but it's going to be a central hub where individuals who are suffering from those kinds of inequities and problems can know that they can come to get everything taken care of in one setting instead of having to go across the entire width and breadth of Cuyahoga County to try to make some things happen. As Judge Conley pointed out, this has been a project of mine really for about the last 10 years, but we've been really operationalizing it for about the last 4 or 5. We brought in some experts from the National Justice Center Alliance in San Diego, where this idea first germinated, who gave us kind of a quick overview and talked to about 100 members of the community in an operational setting to see if there was some energy, some synergy in Cuyahoga County for this concept. And what we found was that there was great energy and synergy for the concept, and we've been moving forward. We've had our ups and our downs. Jill's predecessor, Janet Cronenberg, was a great advocate for this, and when she passed, the mantle fell to Jill, and she's picked it up, and she's done really well to try to move it forward. Over the course of the last year and a half, We've been in the process of trying to find a home for this effort, and we had certain things that needed to be in place for it to be effective. It needed to be near to the Justice Center, but not too close. It needed to have a certain amount of space. It needed to have a certain price point as far as what it was going to cost, because the primary partners were going to be public entities. We want to make sure that the money that they were going to put up was going to be money that was within the budgets. The upshot is that this is a public safety initiative. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There are approximately 75 to 100 of these family justice centers across the United States, and they've actually been expanding across the world. So there now are some in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, and the concept has grown roots and has really taken off. We're a little bit late to the party, as a matter of fact, because of the fact that we have been struggling to find a place. In the course of the last 12 months, maybe the last 18 months, we have looked at least a dozen, and maybe more than a dozen locations in our search for a home. In reality, the place that we are bringing to you on today's date is one of the first places that we looked at, but it was just a little bit further than what was our comfort zone as far as distance from the Justice Center. But over time, what we determined was that it was probably the best place, and that the distance could be made up by other kinds of means that we're exploring. So we are really excited to be at this cusp, at this point, where we can talk to folks from not only the city law department, from folks in the city police department, from the prosecutor's offices of both the city and the county, from the Witness Victim Service Center, and from folks like the Rape Crisis Center and the Domestic Violence and Child Abuse Center, all of these agencies that have come to the table and have said, yes, this is something that we need here in Cuyahoga County. And so again, I want to thank you for listening. I think that these are dollars that will be well spent, that they are dollars that will inure to the benefit of each and every one of your constituencies. And so I ask that you favorably pass upon this. If they have any questions for me, I'm going to take my seat and let Jill take the point, but if there are any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you all have copies of the presentation, but I'll just take you through it fairly quickly. Judge Adrian kind of covered the overall philosophy of what the Family Justice Center is, but I'll just take you through the nuts and bolts of the model, where we've been, and what we're doing today. And then, of course, we'll be able to answer any questions. The Family Justice Center movement, as Judge Adrian kind of alluded to, we're not the first to do this. San Diego, California actually had the first model, and once they opened, it was quickly adopted as a presidential initiative through the U.S. Department of Justice. It was supported by the Violence Against Women Act and kind of overseen by the Office on Violence Against Women. The Family Justice Center concept has been found to increase victim engagement, which results in higher rates of prosecution, which then results in prevention of reassault and overall increase in victim safety. So that's kind of the overall point of why the Family Justice Center is an important piece of our victim service continuum. Real quickly, a Family Justice Center model provides a one-step center for victims of family violence and their children. So we are looking at collaboration with a number of family violence professionals in a common location. We're looking at centralized expertise, and we're looking at, again, creating a really welcoming and positive environment where victims want to seek help so that they become more engaged with the process and are able to really to stay engaged and stay a part of their safety plan. Family justice centers across the country, which is, again, why it was adopted as a presidential initiative under the U.S. Department of Justice. Other centers that have opened have seen a decrease in domestic violence-related homicide. Some places saw, one year they had a rate of about 40 homicides, and by the next year they were down to 16, and then they dropped it down even more from that. Overall, it increases perpetrator accountability. It keeps the victim engaged in prosecution, so that we have cooperating witnesses and that we have just more arrest and more prosecution. This also increases community collaboration and just overall improves services to vulnerable populations. Again, this is a joint initiative between Cuyahoga County and the City of Cleveland. So Judge Adrian did a little introduction for us. I don't know that we'd be to this point without his leadership, so I just want to make sure that we recognize that. But we also have a number of other groups that really stepped up to the plate early on in the process. A lot of them are actually here today, sitting towards the back there. Excuse me, the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center, the Witness Victim Service Center, which is my organization, or my piece of the county structure, Cleveland Division of Police, Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, Cleveland Prosecutor's Office, and the county's Prosecutor's Office, Frontline Services through the Children Who Witness Violence program, and the Legal Aid Society. We started our planning process, and I'll take you through a full timeline, but I just want to briefly introduce, in 2009, we came together and kind of organized ourselves around the core mission that we wanted to ensure the safety and healing of all victims of family and intimate partner violence through accessible, coordinated, and comprehensive services. We took a look at other family justice centers around the country, and most deal with only domestic violence. We determined early on that we wanted to do domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, child abuse, and elder abuse. That's a more that's a broader approach than many family justice center models across the country. And the reason that we wanted to do that was because we know on two levels. One is that we are seeing through the Violence Against Women Act that many of the funding streams that are becoming available are not just for domestic violence, but also sexual assault. And we also know that these frequently co-occur. And so we wanted to ensure that we're addressing family violence across the whole continuum. This slide is kind of a confusing diagram, but it also addresses what, the common problem of what the Family Justice Center is supposed to address. So what we know is that the criminal justice and the civil justice systems frequently make a resolution to an unsafe situation difficult to achieve. So we see that there are a number of steps that a victim has to go through, and we know that victims have to tell their story over and over again. And we know that that's difficult, and we know that it results in disengagement, which is exactly what we're trying to confront. So again, this is a national, this is a slide that's used by a lot of family justice centers. It's not tailored to local services, but it gives you the sort of the visual impact of depicting the difficulty that a victim has when navigating the justice system. Here in Cuyahoga County, we want to distinguish that we are not duplicating existing services. We are not trying to put the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center out of business. We're not trying to put the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center out of business. We're not trying to duplicate what the Witness Victim Service Center does. We're trying to take all of these organizations and bring them together under one roof to provide the mechanisms to really do some good teamwork together. That's particularly important for high-risk cases where we need to collaborate among multiple partners and multiple agencies. So we're going to be able to share information, we're going to be able to coordinate cases, and just work together to make sure that people are safe. We're different from other centers throughout the country. So again, I talked a little bit earlier about how we're dealing with a more comprehensive service population, which follows national trends. We're also probably more committed to evaluation and measuring outcomes than many of our other many of the other cohorts across the country. We're also based on what's already going on. So like I said, we're not trying to duplicate any of the other agencies that are throughout this county. We have a very rich victim response. And I can't focus on that enough. We're really talking about collaboration and coordination and recognizing efficiencies that will ultimately benefit the victims. So we are building, again, on what we have. We're also integrating some of the local county services, such as the Children Who Witness Violence program. Just to take you through a little bit of the timeline of how we got to where we are, as Judge Adrian said, planning for the Family Justice Center in Cuyahoga County began in 2009. We picked up a lot of momentum in 2010 and 2011. In 2011, we were included in Cuyahoga County's Western Reserve Plan when the Western Reserve Plan called for a public safety plan. And the public safety plan, as one of its prongs, introduced the Family Justice Center. We are second in state. There's one other center in the state of Ohio, which serves the northwest territory of the state, which is mostly rural. We're the first urban center in the state. We developed 6 working committees, and this is important. I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into this in just a second. But we worked with 6 committees. There were about 100 people involved in this, and we met, each committee met on a monthly basis. And we developed the service model, we developed an evaluation plan, we developed a plan for how we're going to communicate about the Family Justice Center, which is a little bit harder than you might think because we have to make sure that we're communicating in a way that's still safe for victims. We can't just promote ourselves on a billboard or something like that because we don't want to make ourselves too well known in case, so that we don't set up an unsafe situation for someone. We had a committee that looked at location. We had a committee that looked at organizational development and how we would structure ourselves, and also a committee that looked at funding and ultimately put our budget together. We also had an executive committee, which is representative of all the partners who will be on site. Each committee, as I said, was responsible for making recommendations. So they would take the points of what they were tasked with planning and work together to do research on what other centers throughout the country have done in relation to that, and then we tailored that to our own individual local needs. In 2010, we completed our strategic plan. It was presented to the county leadership at the time, which provided its full support, but then we set our sights on making sure that the incoming government was supportive of this. So we gave some briefings and invited some candidates for both executive and county council to be briefed on this. And as we were doing this and as we were securing additional support, we worked much more on policies and procedures for the Family Justice Center. So this was the time that we took with our partners to look at our plan, to look at the concepts that were submitted by our planning groups and really figure out how to operationalize all these pieces. In 2012 was when we were formally put into the public safety plan. We, at that time, sort of simultaneously, through the Department of Public Safety and Justice Services, we were afforded about $175,000 annually from the county's general fund to fund operations of the Family Justice Center. At the same time, the city of Cleveland committed an additional $175,000, and that was for building expenditures. So the county would pick up some of the programmatic costs, and the city would pick up the space and the operations. So our formal budget of new costs for the Family Justice Center at that point was $350,000. Throughout 2013, we made sure that we had our our partnerships with each of our supporting agencies were kind of more solidified and further developed. We also hired additional staff to help us. So 2013, despite the fact that we were done with the planning and we did not yet have our site identified, we really picked up momentum in putting the pieces of the plan together. We also secured $20,000 in discretionary funding from the St. Luke's Foundation, which represents some private investment, and we hope to only grow it from there. We also entered into an agreement with Cleveland State University, who's providing evaluation services. As I said earlier, so of the 6 committees, the location committee provided the work that's most relevant to our conversation today. So just a little deeper dive into what they did. They took a look at the facilities that other family justice centers across the country have moved into. and kind of did some surveying around what local agencies do and how we work with victims, and we put together a long list of parameters of what we're looking for. So just to kind of boil it down, as Judge Adrian said, we want to be close to the Justice Center, but not too close to the Justice Center. Reason for that being that there's a lot of victims who never want to talk to police, never want to go in front of a judge, never want to engage in prosecution. And one of our core beliefs is that we let the victim choose their response. So if they don't want to go through the criminal justice process, we're not going to make them go through the criminal justice process. We'll help them work with social service agencies so that they access what they feel most comfortable with. So again, along those lines, we also wanted to have discrete availability of law enforcement. Reason for that, again, is maybe they don't want law enforcement involved, but also a lot of our victims have warrants, and that's a real concern. We don't want people coming in with the expectation that they're going to be arrested if they come in. That just sets us up for some injustices. We also want to ensure that we're safe and secure. We want an environment where people can feel like they come in and it's welcoming and it's warm, but it's also safe. And we wanted an area where kids can receive some services and can also just have a chance to be kids. We wanted a playroom. We wanted an area where a mom who's seeking counseling can leave her child for an hour or so and feel like that child's going to be well cared for during that time. So the location committee, in coordination with the county and the city, started to evaluate public spaces. So we did look at public spaces. Most specifically, we looked at the Whitlatch building, which is one of the old juvenile court buildings on Carnegie. And we also looked at the Stokes social service mall, excuse me. Whitlatch was kind of rejected from the process because of the fact that it was included in the portfolio for the county that was set to be sold. So there was just too much uncertainty around what was going to happen with that building. And the Stokes Social Service Mall, we just determined, was not close enough to the to the Justice Center. So we continued to look for space, mostly throughout 2012. That was our big year of looking at space, and that stretched into 2013. The first place that we were very serious about was Erie View Tower, which is right next door to where we ended up, which is Erie View Plaza. Those terms and conditions, unfortunately, those negotiations failed. And it's important to note that at that point, the city of Cleveland was doing the negotiations for this process. So because the city was going to invest the money in the location, they were going to do the lease. However, once Erie View Tower kind of fell through and it started to take more shape, we rethought that model and determined that if the county is going to be the administrative agent for the Family Justice Center, we should have the county be the one who is engaged in the lease. Once Erie View Tower those negotiations kind of fell apart, the listing broker took us on as a cause of her own, and she volunteered to be the buyer broker for us and introduced us to many additional spaces. So you see here, these are the spaces that we looked at throughout 2012 and 2013. These are just the spaces we looked at physically. There were many more that we looked at just based on price and proximity and everything like that. But these are the spaces that we actually went and visited. 2025 Ontario, which is on the bottom of the list, which is right off of Public Square, was the next one that we were most serious about. However, negotiations at that point also failed for a variety of reasons, most specifically because the building was set to be sold and there was just too much uncertainty over what would happen when the ownership was turned over. So again, the county became, at this point, responsible for entering into future lease agreements. And we moved forward with an agreement, a revenue generating agreement with the city of Cleveland that will provide the county with the funds needed for the building. And that's $175,000 annually that they're providing to us. So 75 Erie View in December 2013 presented us with an unsolicited space proposal. They just came to our broker and said, here's what we can provide. Are you interested? She presented it to us, and our executive committee determined that we should pursue this. Again, as Judge Adrian said, we did take a look at 75 Erie View very early in our process, and it was determined that it was not quite the best space at that point. However, as our search continued and our parameters evolved a little, we determined that it really was a good candidate. And so we pursued this proposal. The law department throughout December 2013 and most of the first quarter of this year really worked hard on negotiating this lease for us. And we're here before you today to pursue approving that lease. Some of the nuts and bolts of the proposal, we're looking at 13,500 square feet on the 5th floor at 75 Earview Plaza. Again, we have a $175,000 per year revenue generating agreement with the city of Cleveland. They passed that legislation on March 31st, 2014, and we're currently preparing it to come through the county side of the legislation process. The building meets all of our programmatic expectations. Another thing that we liked about it is that we don't need a whole lot of build out for this. It's in good shape. It's in a great location. There's really not much that we have to do to it. So here you see just a brief chart of our 5-year base costs. So again, this is our base rent. So $742,500 is what we're paying in base rent. The agreement you have before you, or the legislation you have before you, is for $798,000, not to exceed. The reason for that difference is because we needed to include the cost of build-outs, which will be spaced out over time and incorporated into our rent payment. And so we wanted to be sure that we had additional funds for those reasons. Just to get into a little more detail on the budget, Cuyahoga County has committed $175,000 in general fund to support financial operational needs. So you see here some of the items that we're using that funding for. So the total operating budget for FJC is $350,000. However, that's not all that is going into the Family Justice Center. And I believe this is a question that's come up a few times. We also have about $120,000 in federal grant funding, which will be dedicated to our evaluation and some of our public awareness. We have the $20,000 in local grant funding from the St. Luke's Foundation, which results in about $491,000 that the county is committing. But again, we don't stop there. So that's kind of our operational and our space costs. But then we get into our programmatic costs, which are pretty difficult to quantify. And so we focused for this presentation on what the county has invested. The entire operation of the Cuyahoga County Witness Victim Service Center will be moved into the Family Justice Center. 10 of those advocates are specifically domestic violence advocates. Those 10 advocates, we are kind of counting their salaries and their benefits as going directly into the programmatic costs of the Family Justice Center, which equates to $512,000, $513,000 for those 10 advocates. And again, the Witness Victim Service Center will be located there, and so some of the costs that we have in our budget can be reallocated into family justice. Things like some of our contract costs, some of our chargebacks for controlled expenses. And also our partners have committed to providing full and part-time staff. And so that represents some in-kind donation from each of our partner organizations. I don't have a quantification for that, admittedly. The reason for that being we have to be nimble and we have to be very flexible in our approach, because we know that what happens on day one is not going to be what's happening at our 6-month mark. We have to be able to pivot in order to meet the needs of our victims who are coming through the door. So if we initially think that we need 4 detectives there, but it turns out we need 2 detectives, or maybe we need 7 detectives, we need to have that flexibility with each of our partners to let them make those decisions on how they want to meet the needs of the victims who come to us. So just a summary there. If you take the City of Cleveland money for the space, as well as the county's contribution for family justice, which is again the $175 plus the $121 from grants, from the federal grant, plus $20,000 from the St. Luke's Foundation, you get $491, and then the programmatic cost, which is almost $513. So our overall total of county commitment is about $1 million. But we're here today just to talk about the space, which is $798,000 over 5 years. So I would just like to open it up to questions, conversation, discussion. Judge Adrian can help answer any questions.
Has a question?
Madam President, thanks for this presentation. I appreciate all the work that went into this, especially Janet Cronenberg, who really, really put this forward. Is this going to be a 24-hour operation?
Through the chair to the councilwoman, no, this is not a 24-hour operation. We are looking at, to start, business hours 8:30 to 4:30, because that best meets the budgetary needs of each of our partners. However, once we get in there and we see if there's a need, we're talking about additional hours in the evening, maybe once or twice a week, and then building from there. We do have 24-hour access to the building, so that allows us to expand programmatically as needed.
So my question really is pragmatically, how is this going to work? For example, if somebody who wants to get a CPO, which normally that person would go to DR court perhaps, or what would they do? Go to the Family Justice Center first? Go to the domestic court first? Tell me how that would work.
Well, it can still happen any one of those ways. So we have a good relationship with the advocates who work at the Domestic Relations Court. Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center has an advocate there, and the court also now has two domestic violence case managers. So we work with them very closely on a daily basis. We at Witness Victim Service Center have a pretty good way of working with them, so that when somebody comes to our office looking for a protection order that should be housed in DR court, we'll help them get the paperwork started, and then we'll send them over and make a phone call over there to ensure that they're ready for them when they get over there. That won't end. However, if they go there first to DR court, they don't have to come to the Family Justice Center. DR court will be obviously free to make a referral to the Family Justice Center if it's something that they're maybe seeking some criminal pieces, or they want additional resources that could be available at the Family Justice Center. So it won't duplicate that. It won't take the place of that.
If I can add, one of the ideas of having a Family Justice Center in the first instance is that people who find themselves in abusive relationships frequently find that they have to go to multiple places to get things done. And what we're trying to do is to co-locate those services in such a way so that if you came looking for, say for instance, a protection order, but you found out, for instance, that you really needed some other kind of services, maybe even something as pedestrian as transportation, that there would be an ability for someone in the Family Justice Center to turn and pivot to someone right down the hall or to cross the street. I mean, not cross the street, but across the hall to say, listen, I've got somebody over here that's got this, and I'm going to send them right to you. So that person wouldn't have to make an extra trip, to some other location to do that. When we did the first audit, when we brought in folks from the National Family Justice Center Alliance, they sat down with a group of victims over at the what was then the Domestic Violence Center, and they asked them, what was their experience. And from those experiences, they extrapolated that a victim in Cleveland might have to make as many as 20 separate appointments to get all of their needs met when they were coming out of an abusive relationship. And that's the thing that we're trying to, compress by having a Family Justice Center in place.
Madam Chair, just one more statement, if I may. There's a huge gap with the City of Cleveland police responding to domestic violence calls. They just don't. I mean, that's more times than not. That's not what they do. So in the after hours, you don't have City of Cleveland responding to DVs. These victims really have no place to go. So I was hoping somehow that this would be able to capture that grouping that is very prevalent.
Again, and if I can, through the chair to the councilwoman, first of all, we have a new chief of police in the city of Cleveland. And I'm not to say that along the terms of, there's a new sheriff in town, but we do have a new chief of police in place. I have had some initial conversations with him. I expect to have additional conversations with him. The detectives that are going to be housed at the Family Justice Center are just the tip of an iceberg, because the first responders are the people in the zone cars. And so it's about educating those folks and the people in the districts about what needs to happen. Domestic violence is in reality the only misdemeanor crime in the city of Cleveland that's actually investigated by detectives. All of the misdemeanors are just handled strictly by zone cars. So there is, as you rightly point out, there's a gap. And we've been talking about trying to correct that gap for a period of time, but we think having these people located in a central location where they're talking to a lot of other folks, where they can get this information and where we can actually do some training is going to help us in that vein.
If I might add, through the chair to the councilwoman, as I said earlier, we're kind of building this around the continuum of victim services that already exists. And Witness Victim Service Center, as well as Cleveland Police and the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center, are currently in a planning process with the U.S. Department of Justice to bring a best practice model to those zone cars. So it's the lethality assessment program, which will provide training and a way for zone car officers to really address what's going on with domestic violence in specific areas.
I just have to say, I can't believe in 2014 that we still have to do this. It's shocking.
I have a question, just briefly. How many employees and about how many people you serve?
We have a lean staff. For the actual Family Justice Center, it will be half of my time, one program officer, 4, and one program officer, 1. Aside from that, it's all of the staffing from each of the partner agencies. Okay. So if you add in witness victim, that's an additional 20 people. As far as how many people we're looking to serve, most centers, and Witness Victim Service Center serves about 4,000 people a year. About 2,600 of those are domestic violence victims. So we're using that as a jumping off point. Other places, which works out to about 300 a month, I think. If we look at other centers throughout the country, they start at about 100 to 200 a month, and they get up to sometimes as many as 1,000 per month. So we're looking at growing that based on the menu of services that we have available.
And again, to the chair, since we're building this airplane while we're trying to fly it, it's going to take a little bit of trial and error for us to find out exactly what the right mix is. But what we expect to find out is that once the word kind of gets out into the street that there is such a thing as a Family Justice Center, that we're going to see a continual build-up, because that's been the experience in other locations across the country. So we think that that's going to be experienced here in Cleveland.
All right, well, this item is on the agenda later on in our regular meeting, and I thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Through the chair, will 211 give victims this number for referral? I mean, has that been discussed?
Through the chair to the councilwoman, we are not in a formal agreement yet with 211, but it is something that we plan to pursue. Right now, witness victim, domestic, I think all of our partner agencies have agreements with 211, and we're certainly looking to engage 211 for referrals directly to the Family Justice Center.
Instead of going, if you have somebody that call and say,
It would be another one of the options that's available. If it's something that can just be quick, if it's a shelter call, it's still certainly going to go to Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center. But if it's something that falls into a more broad category, we'd be happy to have that referral.
Okay. And to the chair, to the councilwoman, one of the things that we've been extremely sensitive to and careful about is that as we've been trying to build these collaborations and these partnerships, we don't want our partners to feel threatened by this new kid on the block. And so we try to make sure that as we make moves forward, that we're not stepping on anybody's toes. As I've told them from the beginning, I said, I'm not really interested in dividing up your small piece of the pie. What I'm looking at is putting together an entity that will actually grow the size of the pie, because almost every one of us, I imagine I could talk to all of the members of the council, almost every one of us at one point or another has been personally touched by someone's problem as it relates to either domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, or stalking. All of us know somebody close who've had those kinds of problems. Those people are seldom asked really to contribute, in any meaningful way to something like this. And what we hope to do, one of our roles will be to try to enhance the public profile of victim services along these lines so that we'll have a greater ability to have the community engaged, because this is a societal problem and it demands societal solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, Mr. Greenspan?
I'm sorry, thank you. Just a question, so the $175,000 a year that the county is putting in is to go towards operational programmatic issues, and the city is taking care of the
Yeah.
175 for the lease. Who's the lease with for the space? Is it with the county and the?
Through the chair to the councilman, the lease will be between Cuyahoga County and BZT Acquisitions as the owner of 75 Erie View Plaza.
And the city is then going to pay us $175,000 for the space?
Correct. Through the chair, the city and the county are, it was passed by the city on March 31st, 2014, and we're currently working it through our channels to get it done here. But we have a revenue generating agreement with the city of Cleveland for $175,000 annually, which is to be used for this lease and other ancillary services like utilities and things like that.
And how many years was the Cleveland's resolution at 175?
Through the chair, that's a 5-year commitment,
And what is the lease for the space?
also 5 years.
Okay, and the county's 175 contribution is for 5 years as well? So they all coincide with one another?
Subject to future budget years, but that's our
Okay.
hope, yes.
Just one other, on these other grants, are these the two grants, the federal grant and then the St. Luke's? Those two grants, what were the terms of those grants?
Through the chair to the councilman, the $121,000 is through the U.S. Department of Justice Grants to Encourage Arrest, which is a specific funding stream that includes as a priority the Family Justice Center model. That grant we have in place through the end of 2014, and we are in the process of hopefully renewing that funding opportunity. We're in our second funding cycle with that. If we, in the off chance that we don't get that, there's nothing that we're paying for with those dollars that will impact actual services. So the things that we're funding with those grant dollars are things that like evaluation and communications, which are very important for sure. But if in the situation that we would lose that funding, it will not impact day-to-day operations of the Family Justice Center.
And again, to the councilman through the chair, one of the things that we've had our eye on since we started doing this was ultimate sustainability. That is, we don't want to build a family justice center and then 2 years or 3 years down the line, run out of money and everybody say, well, that was a good idea, and move on to something else. So we know that federal grants are never forever. We know that even with government funding, unless you are able to prove proof of concept, that the probability of that continuing on also, is dicey. So what we want to do is to try to establish proof of concept as quickly as we possibly can, and then to start to reach out to other entities within the community that are not necessarily government and are not necessarily federal, well, actually government, I guess is where I should say, that are more private in their nature and would be more along the lines of entities that would want to take care of operations as we go forward. So that's one of our main thrusts.
Okay, and I'm assuming that is a full year grant. We're already halfway through 14. So would the expectation be to receive the full 121, or is that prorated based on the?
Through the chair to the councilman, that's actually it was actually a 3-year award, so we're towards the end of our 3rd year of that.
Okay.
It included some costs for planning process and some staffing and things like that. So we have spent down a lot of the dollars. The 121 is what we're using as part of our operations budget.
And the 20,000, was that a 1-year grant as well?
That's through the chair to the councilman, that's a discretionary grant. It's 20,000, kind of no questions asked, for things that we cannot find other money to pay for. So things that make the Family Justice Center what it should be, which is warm, welcoming, and accessible to clients.
And that's a 1 year though? Year to year?
Yeah, it was awarded to us in December 2013.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Sharon and Mr. Jemana, we kind of got to move on. Go ahead. Mr. Sharon?
Thank you, Madam President. You alluded to that you don't want to be raising the specter of this too high, but how do you market a program that you don't want to let people know? It just seems to me to be an oxymoron there a little bit.
Yeah. Through the chair to the councilman, it's a great question and one that we have spent a lot of time talking about. So we know that if we hand somebody a pamphlet or, a large collateral piece of advertising or marketing, it could end up actually putting somebody in danger. If they have something in their pocket that talks about the Family Justice Center and getting services for domestic violence, and an offender or an abuser finds that, that may be a trigger for additional abuse, and that's something that we don't want to engage in. So what we're doing is we're working through our partners who are here today, who already have access to victims. We're working through our current client base at the Witness Victim Service Center to make sure that people are aware that this is the place to go from here forward. And we're also working with additional community agencies, so specifically through the neighborhood collaboratives, which are partially funded by Cuyahoga County. We're looking at, we've already done briefings to each of the collaboratives and working with places like Westside Community House, St. Martin de Porres, places out in the community who have everyday access, who deal with families every single day, who may need an additional resource to refer a family to. So we're trying to balance that between getting the word out and making sure that we're getting the word out in a way that doesn't ultimately put somebody at risk.
To the chair and to the councilman. And the other part of this too is that, there are specific types of things like the flyers, and then there are more generic kinds of things that talk about, the existence of a family justice center. It's not that we don't want the community to know that there's a family justice center, period, but we want to be very careful and very intentional about how we make that word known. And finding the appropriate way to do that is going to be one of the tasks that we have to really work through as we're moving forward. So for instance, it might be that we work with faith community and other folks that are in a position to have social services available so that they know that we're here, and they're then again in a position where they can push back to us, the people that need to really access the services.
But we have to assume that if security is a concern, somebody's going to have it written on a bulletin board, somebody's going to hand it to them on a slip of paper, somebody's going to have it in their cell phone, somebody's going to have that last dialed numbers. If we're just concerned about security, what are we doing about your individual security and the county's security as far as the location? Is the site itself secure?
Through the chair to the councilman, that's something that the Sheriff's Department has been a wonderful resource for us. They did a walkthrough at the space about 2 weeks ago, did a full assessment of it. They actually went back several times in the evening, different times when they could assess the light that's available, exiting and entering the center. The camera situation of what's available inside as well as outside, and they just produced to us, actually I just saw it today for the first time, about a 40-page security assessment and different recommendations of how we can make the site secure in a cost-effective way. So we're looking at some security cameras. There's already swipe access in and out of the space that we're looking at. Okay. So we're definitely very mindful of the safety and security of not just the clients, but also of our employees who will be there.
And I certainly don't want to speak for the foundations, but it just sounds like it's a place that the Cleveland Foundation, the Gun Foundation, and people like that, Kresge Foundation, would be interested in helping out there.
Yes. And again, through the chair to the councilman, we've had those discussions also. We've been talking to Lisa Bottoms over at the Cleveland Foundation, who actually early on pulled together a group of about 20 different foundations to talk about these before we had something concrete to speak of, so that it's on their radar screen. And now that we know that we actually have space, it's time for us to rotate back around to them and talk to them some more about what they can do.
All right, Mr. Jimena.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to say this in a general way because we have a shortage of time. But I was under the impression that when I first heard this at one of the 2011 or 2012 forums, that this collaboration would cut out redundancy, and that eventually it may be, and when we think in collaboration, people getting together are going to be ultimately saving money. Do you find that in the model?
Through the chair to the councilman, absolutely. I think that's what the Family Justice Center is all about. We as I said, we're not looking to duplicate any services. We're not creating a new domestic violence center or a new rape crisis center. We're looking at ways to bring those groups together to work better together, and we're providing the mechanisms that they need, like data systems, like a comprehensive informed consent form, things like that that'll really help people work together in a high-risk team model. I think to your specific point about ensuring that we're realizing efficiencies, that's the entire core of the model, is the no wrong door model, so that a victim who enters the Family Justice Center maybe will tell his or her story fewer times, and will save money, and will get to the point of their prosecution a little bit faster. We'll have more engaged witnesses, and we'll just have higher rates of offender accountability and lower rates of reassault. So I think that's where we really see the savings.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I know this has been the culmination of a long time dream with Judge Adrian, and I think it'll be very beneficial to this community. So thank you very much. And it's
I
on
want
our
to thank you
agenda.
again for your
Thank you.
consideration.
Okay. All right. Moving on to item 5. We have to go into executive session. All meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio Open Meeting Law. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's committee of the whole will go into executive session to discuss the collective bargaining agreement with ASME, Ohio Council, and AFL-CIO, covering 64 employees of the Public Defender's Office. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we'll ask those who are not specifically needed for the executive session to leave council chambers. Anyone may enter the meeting once the executive session is ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session? So moved. Second. As moved by Mr. Schron and seconded by Ms. Simon. Madam Clerk, you call the roll.
Moving to executive session, Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell?
Yes.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Hairston?
Yes.
Ms. Simon? Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll go into executive session before we kick out Mr. Sweeney. What do you want? Are you leaving or are you staying? Okay, we'll see you later.